First, I would like to introduce Tyler Orton, the Editor-in-Chief of Business in Vancouver. And next, I would like to introduce Glen Clark, who is the Chair of BC Hydro and former Premier, as well as James Prescott, Vice President of Global Sourcing and Procurement for Canadian Tire, and Alexa Young, who is the Vice President, Government Relations and External Affairs for the Vancouver Fraser and Port Authority. Please join me in warmly welcoming this incredible team who will share their perspective on what it means to survive and thrive in the current environment and what they see as key strategies and tactics moving forward.
I want to just give a shout out to Anna and JF from that last panel in the context about a lot of the stuff that's,
especially JF.
There you go. But yeah, I think what we want to do, we want to keep it hyper-local. We want to talk about what can be done, but I think we'd be burying the lead if we don't address what everybody's been talking about the last 10 days in terms of Mark Carney's speech at the World Economic Forum. So I'm just curious from your perspective, is what he's saying with regards to the rules-based order fading and middle powers needing to band together, does that ring true as business leaders? I just want to go one by one. Tell me if that rings true. If so, what are the next steps for business leaders here in British Columbia to take moving forward? I'll start with you, Glen.
The answer is yes, clearly. But talk is cheap. Like, there's tons of work to do to try to implement a strategy. And that would be my big worry about the federal government generally. There's been a lot of very good signaling. I think a lot of the direction's good. But on the ground, actualizing it is really tough. The federal government, in my view, in the last, at least say 20 years, has become kind of a check-writing institution, right? That's what they do. They write checks for Canada Pension. They write checks for stuff. But actually changing policy, driving innovation, creating new programs to drive innovation is something we haven't seen in Canada for a long time, and I'm worried about the ability to do that by the current iteration of the bureaucracy.
James?
Yeah, thanks, Tyler. The short answer is yes. I do think that there is a genuine sense of unity within the business community, that this type of response from the Prime Minister is really rallying. And that's important. That's important as Canadians and for Canada when we're facing these types of challenges around the world. I think the level of pragmatism, as was noted earlier, around trade and trade policy is also something that we need to be alive to as a middle power. We have certain assets that we can share with the world. We're blessed to have these resources available to us, but we need to be thoughtful about how we trade. And I do think the pragmatism that we're seeing through the new leadership is really being thought of through the business community as something that can really help in our growth mindset.
Short answer, absolutely. In a perfect world, of course, we want a dual track, one where Canada gets the best deal possible for Canadians in terms of negotiations with the US. But we have to be pragmatic. We have to be realistic. This is an administration that says one thing one day and 1 hour and something completely different the next. So that forces us to say, what's in our control? What do we have the levers? We have to be absolutely realistic about our place as a middle power, as an export-oriented, small, middle-sized economy. But this was absolutely the right move to galvanize the country around what needs to be done. Glen is absolutely right. That needs to translate into action. What does doubling exports to non-US markets look like in 10 years? That's going to mean we need to build a whole bunch more stuff. Think about mines, energy products, grain, potash, you name it. We need to make more things. We need to grow more things. We need to mine more things. We need to know who we're selling them to. So we absolutely need to double down on things like trade missions to India, good moves, but that needs to happen now. And of course, we're the biggest port in Canada here at the Port of Vancouver, the biggest when you even look at the next biggest ports, 5 biggest ports in Canada combined. We're going to have to invest more. We're going to need to get projects built. Robert Banks Terminal 2, a project that went through a 10-year environmental assessment process and still isn't being built. These things need to happen. And before I come off, I want to ask the audience. I mean, I look around this room and have had the chance to wear lots of hats and work with many of you, but stand up if you're someone who is making something. Your company or you are making something, building something, harvesting something. I know many of you, so don't be too cool. Stand up. Awesome. Who in this room is shipping things, putting stuff on railroads, loading things? Who of you are selling things or services to actually get these things moving? And who wants to work together to actually heed the Prime Minister's call and get stuff done? I know I'm excited about that. I know a few of you are here, but I think there's a whole lot more folks that want to galvanize around this message and get big things done.
On that note, we have both federal and provincial governments. They're promoting fast-tracking a lot of projects. Let's cut down the red tape. Glen, you mentioned earlier, talk is cheap. Alexa, I'll start with you. At the ports, how do you view kind of the ability to get that capacity going based on what we're hearing from federal, provincial governments, and just the ability to enact that moving forward? Like, how realistic is it based on maybe past experience at this point?
You think about a few things. So one, there's of course the get more big projects built. Of course, RB22 is one of them. Another second narrows dredging. We have the TMX pipeline. We're now exporting out of Westridge Terminal. That's good news for Canada. But those tankers are only going out 70% full. By a small, minor project to dredge under the second narrows, we can actually optimize, maximize the ability to get more product out to those markets who want and need what we make. 3, absolutely, we need to get our regulatory processes in better shape. Things like the Major Projects Office can help in terms of being a facilitator in finding the right levers, but that needs to be an experiment that leads us to the bigger, broader policy and regulatory levers that need to be activated to make sure that we don't have in perpetuity an office that has all of the projects that are going to be required to get built to actually meet the moment and double exports in 10 years.
I want to bring it back to James, because you have kind of an interesting journey into Canadian Tire. I wonder if you can kind of expand on how you ended up there and kind of what your experience in terms of manufacturing, retail, how that's all combining into what's going on with a very uncertain economy right now. Yeah,
Tyler, if I can first just
Absolutely.
add on to a couple of things that Alexa said, and I'll gladly share that story. There's also small things that are happening. And some of these small things, when they're built up over time, make a big difference. And I'll give you a great example with the Port of Vancouver and something that we're very supportive of. We are Canada's largest merchandise importer into the country. 90% of that merchandise flows through the Port of Vancouver. We have a significant interest in its efficiency and how it's run. And one of the things that we're really impressed with through the Port Authority are their investments in software for optimization, for reducing vessel anchorage, for reducing berth times. These may sound like small things that don't matter, but in the end, when you think about a business that relies on getting to market, speed to market matters. Our regional supply chain strategy needs investment in order from supply chain partners to support our customers and our businesses, the dealers that work in the communities throughout British Columbia. So really pleased and really impressed with the care that the Port Authority is taking on that journey as a business partner. What I will say, which is a little bit unique about my experience with Canadian Tire, I sold a business to Canadian Tire roughly 12 years ago. Glen and I were chatting a little bit earlier around the table. One of the key sponsors of that acquisition was Alan McDonald, a former executive at Canadian Tire. And what the business recognized at that time was we are Canada's retailer. We have a footprint across this country that's very meaningful inside many communities. And being a business owner here in British Columbia, a small business owner, but seeing the investment that a national enterprise would take in our business was really welcome. I didn't think I'd be at Canadian Tire. I thought I'd still be an entrepreneur. But I take that entrepreneurialism with me, and really impressed with Canadian Tire's continued commitment here in British Columbia. Investments in supply chain, investments in retail, investments in warehousing, investments in people. So it's been a great journey.
So I want to point out, earlier we had JF Perot speaking, and I jumped over to Scotiabank. I wanted to see what their forecast was for GDP growth here in British Columbia in 2026, because the name of the game today is we're talking about reaching 3% growth. This is what the GBBOT has us here to discuss. Scotiabank's forecast, it's 1.7% growth right now for British Columbia. That's down from last year. Looks like we have a ways to go, and there are going to be a lot of things that we can do, but Glen, are there simple bottlenecks? Are there things that seem obvious that we can do, or are there major bottlenecks that are kind of stymieing kind of potential growth that you see could be moved forward?
Both, actually. I do think, only in Canada would we create a bureaucracy, the Major Projects Review Office, to improve the bureaucracy. In other words, there's these challenges that require real change, not cosmetic change. For example, my Minister of Energy, exempted wind projects from the Environmental Assessment Office, like literally exempted it. It's a 2-year improvement timeline to get things done. I think we need more of that to try to actually, if we want to actually goose the economy, we want to really move. Some of the challenges in Canada is it is difficult to build things. And if we really want to fix the Canadian economy long term, we have to make it easier to build. When I worked for the Jim Pattison Group, we do a lot of business in the United States, and it's just so much easier to do business there. And some of it is what's happened in Canada is with all good intentions, we've got program, whether it's environmental protection or other issues or First Nations issues, and what happens is they get layered on top of each other. They get layered on top of each other, all with good intentions, all individually maybe making sense, but collectively make it extremely difficult to get things done. So I think big change in the regulatory environment requires more root and branch changes to really get things moving. Sorry, I'm just going to do that.
I'm guessing that first mic was not manufactured here in British Columbia, so hopefully that one will work. Yeah. You brought up First Nations.
Yeah.
I think that's important to talk about, especially in light of the last 6 months or so of court decisions. I will say that as an editor, I often put my hand in the palm of my face when I look at some of the emails that I get about people not necessarily understanding what the rulings mean, what the implications are, what the history is as well. I'm going to throw it out to both you and as well as James in terms of what should engagement look like moving forward while we're looking to balance growth.
Well, I think it's obvious that certainly in British Columbia, we need to work with First Nations to get things done. And I think, there's no real shortcut to that other than recognizing it up front. More and more businesses are doing that. Susanna Pierce was here, she did the big projects got done with the support of First Nations. And so there's no way around that. And the challenge will be, can we do that in a timely fashion? Can we get engagement that's meaningful and makes a difference? And what we tried to do at BC Hydro and other places, of course, is through equity participation. So through equity participation, you can enlist, a common goal of trying to get some things done. And I think we're doing that. I think we're making great progress. I think the other speakers are correct that because there is both federal and provincial governments driving in that direction, and really supporting, say, resource extraction and development in British Columbia, and gas development in British Columbia, through partnerships and with all governments pushing hard, I think we are going to see quite a dramatic growth rate in British Columbia going forward. I do think there's a time lag, though. We should be honest about that. It's not; these things are not going to move the GDP, in 6 months. There's a ramp up time, and I think, I think it is all happening. So I think we're in really good shape. Remember when there was the big LNG project and Site C and a few other projects going at the same time? I think the estimates were about a 1.5% growth in GDP just from those big major projects. And we have more than that on the books now for the northwest of British Columbia. And so if we can get most of those done, we will see a significant lift in the GDP of BC.
I'm curious, though. I want to throw it over to Alexa because we have a good Slido question here that I'm going to go to. And it says, how do we get things built while also having, oh, I'm sorry. This is actually one that was further up. It was, do we have the infrastructure on the West Coast to seize the trade opportunities with Asian economies?
Yeah, it's a really good question. We're already uniquely poised at the Port of Vancouver. We're less exposed to the U.S. 80% of exports are already destined to non-U.S. markets. We ship to 170 countries. That being said, think about doubling exports in the next 10 years. We have about 3,100 vessels that go through the Port of Vancouver on an annual basis. Think about how many more ships that is. That's going to require a lot more capacity. So again, things like building new industrial land, like at Roberts Bank's Terminal 2, expanding container capacity by $100 billion a year, getting some of those projects up and running. And it's not just the big projects, it's the sexy ones too. It's rail extensions, it's roads, it's underpasses. Of course, when you add trade-enabling infrastructure that has an impact on communities, we need that supporting, last-mile infrastructure to also be supported. It's not cheap. It's not easy, and it's not cheap. It's going to require investment, both private and public. And it's not just about spending money for the sake of spending money. You also have to look at how do you reduce costs through efficiencies and optimization. You had a really great example about how we're using digital technology. So things like our new active vessel management traffic program. So working with terminal operators, with the railways, through digital twins and the collection of data and the sharing of data to have a better sense of what's the weather, what are the tides, what are the currents, to do better scheduling and make shipments more efficient. So just in 1 year, CN's participation has allowed 10% more volume to go over the Second Narrows Bridge. So just one example of an efficiency. So it's get projects built, invest more, not just the big stuff, the small stuff too, but then focus on innovation and tech adoption and new tools.
We think British Columbia, we often don't think it as the manufacturing hub of Canada, James. And I also wonder about the practicality of any talk or chatter there might be about decoupling from our largest trading partner. I don't think anyone thinks that's really going to happen. Can you talk to us a little bit about manufacturing capacity, reshoring, nearshoring, friendshoring, whatever jargon is being used right now? But I am very curious about what manufacturing means moving forward here.
Yeah, so that's a great question, Tyler, and let me preface this. Some of this may come from the perspective of an importer versus an exporter, and there's very important considerations at a policy level when we think about the two sides of our trade. So first of all, from a manufacturing perspective, what I like about a big focus on Canadian manufacturing is that I do think this provides for long-term, sustainable economic growth, good jobs, and if we're choiceful, a leadership role in the world in particular areas of advanced manufacturing. When it comes to the things that you'll see on a shelf at Canadian Tire, I think it's hard to imagine that we would onshore the manufacture of toasters and blenders. Why do I say that? We import from over 80 countries around the world, and I spend a lot of my time with my team offshore in factories. And what's impressive about some of the factories that we visit is the level of automation, the robotics, the production efficiencies, the quality control, all things that are necessary for global manufacturing. What we don't see typically as Canadians is the industrial cluster and the sub-supply network that sits behind that. So to make a blender or a toaster or a drill, things that China in particular, but other parts of the world are good at, there is an entire ecosystem that supports that underneath. So what I would highly recommend in that regard is that Canada find areas where we can be world beaters, where we can be the best at something from a manufacturing perspective. Embrace that, prioritize that, be ruthless in supporting your industrial ecosystem underneath that. If you're not, you cannot compete for value in the world. We're too good at moving things around the world today.
I do think there's some opportunities, though, that are really arising, partly out of the new government and the Trump threat. Some people call it sort of military Keynesianism, but some of this big increased investment in the military, which I think is many Canadians, I would argue, is long overdue in terms of protecting the North, in terms of our coastlines. Negotiating with, for example, Hyundai to do some manufacturing of submarine components here, or whoever it is. There's opportunity for offsets, which is really typical around the world, and we've never really done that very well in Canada because we haven't had the big government investment in the military. And so with this big expansion of investment, there are opportunities to sort of drive some kind of ancillary benefits. And I think you're right, you need to do all of the above, because if you're good at doing a subcomponent for a submarine, you might be good at doing some other electronic component. And I think there are some limited opportunities for import substitution. And I think if we are serious about that as a country, we can't do it in a passive way. Let's give a very simple example. We got this North Coast transmission line. It's a $6 billion project. Think of it as 1,300 very big towers for that extra high voltage transmission line across the north. The towers, I'm told, have to be built in Turkey or Brazil. They're the only people who build these towers. But if you look at an electric tower, it's basically angle iron. The design is very sophisticated, and that has to be done by people who know how to design them. But the actual components are really pretty elementary. So I said, well, why can't we get the steel in Canada? And so we're looking at that. But of course, we have very limited steel production in Canada, and what we do produce is not that particular product. And if we want to do that kind of product, we have to induce it. And is our project enough to induce that kind of behavior? Probably not. But if it's Quebec Hydro, Manitoba Hydro, and British Columbia Hydro, and we commit to sourcing that angle iron, if you will, those components in Canada, we could build it in Canada. And there's other examples of that in terms of transformers. The two big transformers that companies that Hydro uses, BC Hydro, is, I believe, Hitachi and Hyundai. The Hitachi rep said, gee, we would build a factory in Canada, there's enough business here, except every utility in Canada has slightly different specs, because their own, the Quebec Hydro is a different spec from Manitoba Hydro, different spec from here. And if you talk to the engineers, they'd probably say, well, it's wetter in British Columbia or something, of some reason. But really, seriously, if you want as a country to start looking at harmonizing some of those kinds of things, working together to do that, we could induce some limited manufacturing in terms of those components in Canada. And I think those things require active involvement by government as opposed to passive. If you said to the procurement person, we want to buy Canadian, they put out a tender, well, nobody's going to bid on that. You have to actually go the next step and say, well, could we build it here? Could we build it competitively here? And then how would we do that? And that requires really getting your hands dirty and doing the real work. And that's what, that is a role, I think, for, say, the federal government that would be quite productive, to see if there are opportunities to induce some behavior, some manufacturing behavior in Canada.
I want to go to Slido. The top question here, I think it's important. If you look at what happened after the Second World War, is one of the most explosive times of economic growth, and is because so many more women were entering the workforce. And so the question here is, women's workforce participation is necessary for families and the economy. How do we get childcare built as a nation-building infrastructure? As executives here, I mean, there's a lot of pressure on government. We've got, say $10 a day childcare, but I'm thinking about how much private sector could enact a lot of economic growth by facilitating a lot of their own policies for childcare. I'll throw it out to the entire panel here.
It's a great question and a really important topic. You just said it. The more we have an inclusive economy, the more productive and competitive it is. There are policy things that can be done, but certainly from a corporate or organizational perspective, having flexible work models. I think we're in a really interesting time coming out of the pandemic where more workforces, including ours, are asking the workforce to come back into the office for more days of the week. That reduces some of the flexibility that parents had on childcare over the past few years. That's changing, so we as workforces have to be thinking about, outside of that, in a hybrid environment, but a less hybrid environment, how do we create policies that allow flexibility where parents can go pick up kids, deal with emergencies, deal with the things that come up on a day-to-day basis in a way that allows parents, women to be a productive part of the workforce and strike that balance that they need.
Yeah, I absolutely agree, Alexa. I think for a modern workforce to think that by not having inclusive workforce policies, you are actually undermining your business performance. I genuinely believe that there is a balance, and speaking very openly with a large workforce like Canadian Tire's, and I speak only about our corporate workforce, the tension that exists around decisions to return to office or provide a hybrid environment were very real, and candidly, oftentimes data wasn't really driving decisions. It was really, how do we feel about our current culture, our current state of operating? And I think the more we dig into it, and recently announced additional flexibility for elder care, for child care, for work from home days, just providing things that will not only benefit our workforce, they'll benefit our business. So yeah, I certainly believe that this is something that progressive companies need to do moving forward.
I like the question. And the reason I like the question is I think too often we see childcare as a social program, as opposed to an economic program. And I think if you can start looking at it and saying, as a business, it would, how can we improve productivity and enhance the workforce, have an inclusive workforce, bring everybody in, have women and others enter the workforce in an easier way? How can we have labor force mobility? All of those things require, I think, a decent childcare system. And I think if you start looking at it that way, that's how you justify the kind of investment that's been made. British Columbia has made some progress with working with the federal government here, as of course Quebec, I guess, is the leader. And it'd be a shame to lose that progress because of the challenging financial circumstances, because I think really it's the opposite. The more we invest in these kinds of things, the stronger the economy becomes.
So I'm not ignoring that question about the largest deficit in provincial history, but we also have somebody speaking today that might be able to address that specifically. Yeah, I got a text message now just confirming that she will.
Tyler, can I hijack your moderation?
Absolutely.
Just because there's one topic we haven't talked about. We talked a lot about getting things built, the need to do that. One of the things that concerns me about the moment is we have this momentum right now. We have public permission to be talking about this agenda, but we all know, it's going to last a while, but we all know that the pendulum can swing. And so it's really important for organizations, for business, to keep their eye on the prize when it comes to what the other thing that's our competitive advantage, when that's the fact that we do things really well in British Columbia, in Canada, when it comes to building things with care for the environment, in partnership with First Nations, and we can't lose sight of that. The world is actually still watching and looking for some of those things. You know, the Prime Minister was at the ASEAN Summit in the fall, and their theme, despite the geopolitical environment, was still sustainability. So that's what customers want. So to me, we need to stay focused on that. It's a competitive advantage. We need to be saying that out loud, and it will help in the long term. If we do that, we will retain the permission of the public and give permission to our politicians to be making the right choices moving forward.
So, yeah. I do want to address that first question that we have here. How can we ensure action is taken on infrastructure upgrades? We think back, look, we had Coca-Cola closures a few Christmases ago, stymied transportation across the province. We've had flooding in the Fraser Valley, again, stymieing transportation, getting in and out of ports right here. It's not just getting goods at the port, it's how do we get them across Canada and get them out across Canada as well. I'll throw this to everyone, like, what is the practicality of improving infrastructure at a time where we're witnessing climate change having a big impact on everything we do in the economy?
Well, I think resiliency around climate change has really become important. In many respects, you know, the focus has been on, you know, climate action plans and, you know, trying to limit the warming of the earth, and all of that, of course, is totally legitimate. But I think we haven't looked enough at resiliency for the change that is coming and what we're seeing in terms of forest fires, in terms of flooding, in terms of what it means to infrastructure. I just say one positive thing for a second. You know, if you look at British Columbia and BC Hydro again, and you look at like Metrotown, and you look at Brentwood, and this massive developments of urban developments, the substations there were basically built in the 1960s. And you know, they haven't really been replaced. So somebody in the 1960s had the foresight to build these resilient systems that have accommodated this massive growth in the population and in the energy usage of British Columbia with very little incremental investment. Now, we need a lot now as we move forward, but I think in some cases, you know, the resiliency and doing it well and doing it in a resilient way, building things in a way that can withstand some of the natural disasters that are coming, I think make a lot of sense, and I think we haven't paid enough attention to that.
Okay. I'd love to pick everyone's brain for about 45 more minutes. We are out of time, but I just want to thank every one of you guys for taking the time out and just sharing your knowledge with everyone here. I thought this was just kind of fascinating conversation that we're having here today. So if everyone could please acknowledge our amazing panel.